Picture this. The year is 1241, and somewhere on the western steppe, the most dangerous army in human history is on the move. The Mongol horde had already devoured China, then Persia, then Russia, then Poland. Not just defeated them, devoured them. Cities that had stood for centuries were ash within days, populations that numbered in the millions. Gone. These weren't soldiers marching to war. They were a force of nature wearing armor, and they were not done. Genghis Khan was dead, but his sons had inherited something more dangerous than his crown. They had inherited his philosophy. And that philosophy was ruthlessly simple. There is no enemy that cannot be broken. None. Ever. In the entire history of the Mongol conquests, they had never, not once, encountered something they could not eventually overcome. That was about to change, because on the horizon of the Caspian Sea, something appeared that no human being in 1241 had any framework to understand. It was 12 miles offshore. It wasn't moving. It wasn't fleeing. It wasn't afraid. It was 1,092 feet long, displaced 100,000 tons of water, and on its deck, its vast, unbelievable deck, sat 90 aircraft. The Mongols had a word for everything they had ever conquered. They had no word for this. Now, before we talk about what that carrier could do to an ancient army, we need to talk about why the Mongols deserve our genuine respect. Because if you dismiss them as primitive cavalry-waving bows, you're making the same mistake every civilization they destroyed made right before they ceased to exist. At their peak, Mongol cavalry covered 100 miles in a single day. 100 miles. No European army would match that pace for another 6 centuries. Their composite bows were engineering masterpieces, effective at 350 yards from a moving horse. They had mastered feigned retreats, coordinated flanking maneuvers, and psychological warfare so sophisticated that entire cities surrendered before the Mongols had even fired a single arrow. Temujin, the man history remembers as Genghis Khan, didn't build the largest contiguous land empire in history through brute force. He built it through relentless, obsessive, almost frightening intelligence. He studied enemies. He adapted instantly. He outthought everyone. So what actually happens when the greatest military mind of the ancient world faces the greatest military machine ever constructed? His name is Jebi. He is the finest archer in the entire Mongol army. The man once shot Genghis Khan's horse out from under him at 200 yards during an active battle, and not only survived, but went on to become one of the Khan's most trusted generals. Jebi has looked at every enemy, every terrain, every challenge the ancient world could throw at him, and he has always found the answer. Always. Jebi stands at the shore of the Caspian Sea. He looks at the thing in the water. It isn't a wall. It isn't a fortress. It doesn't behave like something that fears him. It just sits there, 12 miles out, watching. Then, without warning, something rises from its deck. An FA-18 Super Hornet. Twin engines screaming. Afterburners fully engaged. 0 to 150 knots in 2 seconds. Jebi has hunted eagles his entire life. He understands the geometry of flight, the arc of a moving target, the physics of the air. But this is nothing like an eagle. This metal shape, larger than anything that has ever left the ground, is not flying. It is violating the sky. It accelerates past every physical intuition he has built over decades, and it is gone before his brain can finish forming the thought. Then it breaks the sound barrier, and half a second later, a crack of thunder splits the air above a completely cloudless sky. Not thunder, something else, something wrong. 3,000 horses lose their minds simultaneously. Jebi does not run. He stands at the shore and watches the horses scatter and the riders struggle, and for the first time in his entire life, the very first time, he does not know what he is looking at. Now let's talk about what Jebi is actually facing, because the numbers are almost difficult to believe. The FA-18 Super Hornet carries a 20mm M61 Vulcan rotary cannon, rate of fire, 6,000 rounds per minute. 6,000, a 3-second burst. Just 3 seconds, delivers 300 rounds across a line 400 meters long. The entire front rank of the Mongol cavalry, horses and riders, simply stops existing. But here's the thing, the carrier doesn't even need to launch fighters for the opening move. The USS Nimitz carries BGM-109 Tomahawk cruise missiles, range 1,550 miles, speed 550 miles per hour. These missiles fly at 100 feet above the ground, hugging terrain contours, threading through valleys below the tree line, guided by GPS to within 10 meters of their target. The Mongol supply lines, their felt tents, their siege equipment, the vast horse herds stretching 40 miles behind the front lines. All of it could be destroyed in a single coordinated strike before a single Mongol rider even knew an attack had been launched. And the carrier's SH-60 Seahawk helicopters carry forward-looking infrared radar, which means night means nothing. Cloud cover means nothing. A dispersed cavalry spread across the steppe means nothing. The thermal signature of 150,000 horses is readable from 10 miles in the air. There is no darkness deep enough. There is no forest thick enough. There is no terrain that hides them. But here, right here, is where this thought experiment gets genuinely fascinating, because the Mongols' greatest weapon was never their bows or their horses. It was their minds. Genghis Khan maintained the most sophisticated intelligence network the ancient world had ever seen. His scouts preceded his armies by weeks. He knew the internal politics, the psychological vulnerabilities, the supply dependencies of every enemy before he engaged them. His whole doctrine was built on one principle: never fight on your enemy's terms. So the Mongol response to an invisible, airborne, seemingly invincible force, they wouldn't charge it, they would vanish, scatter into units of 10, the Arban, the fundamental cell of Mongol tactical organization, move only at night, deny the carrier any concentrated target, feed it false information, study the patterns of aircraft launches, probe for weaknesses, disappear into the landscape, and make the carrier hunt for them across 500,000 square kilometers of steppe. Could it work? For a time, honestly. Maybe. The E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft can track 2,000 simultaneous targets from 300 miles away. But tracking is not the same as destroying. A dispersed, moving, intelligent adversary across that much terrain is a genuinely hard targeting problem, even with 21st century technology. Genghis Khan survived every great power of his era by refusing to let them fight the war they planned. He would force the carrier to fight a different kind of war, a slower war, a war of patience and attrition and complexity. But here is the truth, the hard, unavoidable truth. Jebe's arrows are perfect. 1,000 years of refinement went into that bow, that draw weight, that release. At 300 yards from a moving horse, his accuracy is something modern athletes with modern equipment genuinely cannot replicate. His skill is absolute, and it is completely irrelevant, because the FA-18 is moving at 1,100 miles per hour, 20,000 feet above him, and his arrow cannot reach it, not even close. The gap between them is not a gap in courage or intelligence or will. It is a gap in physics. In the energy stored inside 2 naval nuclear reactors, in the mathematics of a GPS satellite orbiting 12,000 miles overhead, in 700 years of accumulated science, metallurgy, aerodynamics, electronics, propulsion, that no amount of individual genius could have compressed into a single lifetime. The Mongols conquered the ancient world because they were always 200 years ahead of their enemies. The carrier sits 700 years ahead of them. And that is not a gap you can ride around. History doesn't remember the armies that were destroyed by technology they couldn't have imagined. It remembers the ones who learned from it. The Mongols, of all people, each Bilbo would have understood that better than anyone.